were waiting for a sign to make the leap, this is it, because sometimes it's as easy as that. You just need the last nudge to change something, maybe something big. The first time I started over, I was in my mid-30s. After a terrible breakup, I crashed. For a month, I was broken, although I didn't know it yet. For a long time, I couldn't put the finger on it. But deep down, I knew something was seriously wrong, that my life left the road I wanted to travel on. I needed a change, a really big one. Black mold in my pantry and a stubborn landlord were the last nudge I needed. Chapter 1. Make a decision. One morning, halfway through my cup of coffee, I decided to leave and never come back. I got up and wrote a letter to my landlord. The same evening, I already sold the first pieces of furniture on eBay. A few weeks later, I became a digital nomad. I was already working 100% from home. I just needed a laptop, a microphone, and something to wear. All of it fit into a 50-liter backpack. For over 2 years, I lived here and there. I always stayed for a few months, tried to learn the local language, take some cooking classes, and make friends. Where to go next, I always decided spontaneously. From Copenhagen, I went to Dresden, then to Prague. As I arrived in Prague, the temperature dropped to -10 degrees. It was the kind of cold that makes you question your life choices. So, in the midst of winter, I decided to go to Madrid in the beginning of the next year. And I fell in love with the city immediately. Madrid is a city that is beautiful in the everyday, because the everyday doesn't feel like the everyday. Back then, I started an Instagram series, 100 Reasons to Love Madrid. I couldn't stop and I ended up with almost 200. But I had to move on. I went to Berlin for the summer and a project at the university there, and from there to Rome and then to Brussels. Having distance between me and my old life made me realize a lot of things about myself and about the kind of people I used to invite into my life. And after about a year and a half, I felt it was time to have a place again. Somewhere I could call home, where my stuff is, where I can host friends, and where I can return to when I go through a rough patch. Chapter 2. Don't be afraid to change your mind. That's why I eventually decided to move back to Germany. Different city, but still old life, somehow. Because I thought it was better for my career and better for my social life. Another decision, and maybe not the best one. Because I didn't think about the tram. It runs outside of my window, night and day. You feel it in your chest, in your mattress, in the walls. At some point, I moved into the kitchen to sleep. Whenever I'm in my flat in Düsseldorf, I'm dragging myself through the day because I'm never fully rested after a night close to the tram rails. Already after the first weeks back in Germany, I knew this wasn't a good fit anymore. And after only 2 weeks in Düsseldorf, I booked another 2 months in Madrid, although I was seriously running out of money. But sometimes the decisions that are the wisest financially are not the ones that bring you happiness. And for almost 2 years, this became my rhythm. 2 months Spain, 2 months Germany. And I can tell you, even though this might sound exciting, it was surprisingly draining, financially and emotionally. But I had to admit that this is not only the lack of sleep that is dragging me down in Germany, it was the lack of a social life. When you move a lot or travel for a long time, you become a pro at being alone. And you eventually learn to be good company to yourself. But after arriving in Düsseldorf, I had to admit, I was a lot happier while I lived in Spain. Maybe happier than I could ever be in Düsseldorf. Because I like the version of myself better. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius said, everything's destiny is to change, to be transformed, to perish, so that new things can be born. So now it's time to make the third big decision in 5 years and finally move to Spain. Chapter 3. Find a point of no return. After becoming a nomad, after traveling for 2 entire years, and after living in 2 different countries at the same time for another 2 years, my life will take another turn. This is why a few weeks ago I went to the post office in Madrid to give notice. Because in Germany there's a notice period, 3 months to be exact. There's a specific date by which the letter has to arrive, or none of it counts. This is why I had to send the letter while I was still in Spain, because otherwise it would only take longer for me to finally take off. And I really needed this. I needed a point of no return to finally follow through with an idea I had for almost a year. The point of no return can be scary, but this is what it takes to turn a vague idea into a plan, and a plan into action. This letter, this piece of paper handed to a stranger in a post office, this is when it became real. I'm going to start over. Again. And now the clock is ticking. I have a few weeks to figure out which furniture do I want to take with me, what happens with my jobs, what do I actually need to bring, and what gets left behind. Which, if you ever move countries, you know is not just a logistical question. Now, the decision is made, the lease will end, and in about 7 weeks, I'll move on. Chapter 4. Get organized. The decision and the point of no return are emotionally the biggest steps when you want to start over. Emotionally. And they can be very exciting because you can start to imagine your new life. For me, whenever I tell somebody about my decision, I feel that I'm smiling. And I think that's a very good sign that this is the right decision. But after that comes, most of the time, the not so fun part. Now you must follow through with it because there's no way back. For me, that means to get organized. Lists give me the sense of control. And this makes me feel calm while I'm turning my life upside down. There are a lot of to-dos now. Figure out what to do with my furniture, sell it, donate it or ship it, cancel all the German contracts, the internet, the electricity, the health insurance, update my address everywhere. Then think about the tax situation, find a Spanish accountant, and figure out which clients still want to work with me after I'm not German tax citizen anymore. This part doesn't really feel like starting over. It feels like a lot of work, like admin. But it is actually starting over, because without this part, the rest doesn't happen. And I think it applies to a lot of forms of starting over. When you live with a partner that isn't good for you, you must plan the steps too. And if it's a problematic person, you might want to plan all of this before you tell them about your decision. Or if you want to change your career path, there are a lot of steps from the wish to quit to actually starting a new life. So write it down, break it into weeks. Make it boring enough to actually do it. Make sure you thought of everything. And then do it. Chapter 5. Believe in your decision. Sometimes when the tram smashes my dreams, I second my decision. Because sometimes when you decide to quit your job, end a relationship, or move away, you start to romanticize your former life and somehow question your decision because they come with all of these to-dos. But the tram keeps reminding me why I leave. And after barely sleeping most nights, I learned not to trust everything I think when I lie awake at night. In case you don't have a tram outside of your window to remind you where you need that change, talk to a friend or a family member you feel close to. Tell them your reasons. Allow them to remind you whenever you hesitate or have doubts, especially when you want to break up with someone and don't want to talk your friend's ear off about the same person again and again. Make a list. Write your reasons in a journal or on a piece of paper and put it on the fridge. Because for big life changes, you sometimes need to remind yourself why you don't want to go on like this. Having doubts is okay, but believe in your decision. Chapter 6. Find your allies. I'm living in a flat that slowly empties, with a life that again wants to be packed up in boxes. Starting over means to throw yourself in at the deep end and changing directions when you realize you're on the wrong path. I'm not good at handling vague situations. I don't do well in the in-between. And in Germany, I was always in between, always waiting for the next trip to a client or an old friend to make time for me, waiting for the rain to stop, waiting to go back to Spain. So here I am, starting over again. Still, the hardest thing about starting over is to believe you're never too old to leave. The older we get, every now and then, we need a reminder that we don't have to stay. You're lucky if you have friends who remind you of this. Having allies for your decision is the greatest thing that can happen to you. You don't necessarily need friends to carry your moving boxes. You need people who help you carry on when the process feels too heavy or when you question your decision. Because sometimes it's already enough to talk about it. Sometimes it's enough to say it out loud. And when you talk to somebody who understands you, your problems feel manageable. On a picnic blanket, they almost don't feel like problems anymore. And some even turn into real adventures. Like packing up your life and running away. Like taking the leap. Like the future is wide open again. Chapter 7. Keep going. In a few weeks, the movers will come to bring my stuff to Spain. They'll store it, since I didn't find a home yet. Before I move away, I will visit all my old friends. And I'll have a party to say goodbye for now. I'll hope they still let me visit them, even though the trip will be a little longer in the future. Maybe my friendships will change too. But the older I get, the more I believe that most things change for the better. And sometimes it's okay to part ways and become strangers again, after you walked a part of the way together. So after making a decision, just keep going, until you made it to where you really want to be. Where you wake up rested, where people love you, where you feel like yourself, where you're happy. Life is the greatest adventure you'll ever be on.